I'm hoping that what I'm about to tell you might pique your interest. Now, I'm not normally a believer in supernatural things or creatures that go bump in the night, but something I encountered on a camping trip a couple of years ago in Olympic National Park gave me a permanent fear of camping. Let me set the stage. It's the middle of fall. The leaves are putting on their stunning display of reds and oranges. The air is crisply cold, and there is still the feeling of festivity. I'm a nature photographer, see, and my goal was capturing the beauty of the wilderness during this particular time of the year. So one ordinary afternoon, I set off to find the perfect campsite. I had a site in mind, somewhere near the edge of a body of water, perfectly backlit by the setting sun. After a few hours of hiking, there was this beautiful spot by a small brook with just the right lighting conditions. Once the camp was set up, I started capturing the bits of nature that are often unnoticed by the naked eye. It was exciting and challenging for me, trying to immortalize the rays filtering through the rustling leaves or catch the subtle sway of the tall pines in the wind. As the sun dipped, I returned to my camp to prepare for the night. It was then that I noticed something odd. My campsite, which was blissfully quiet when I left, seemed different. The stillness that I loved about the wilderness had taken on a weird vibe. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just a change of mindset after a full day of photographing. After a simple dinner, I wanted to check out the evening light to see what I could find. With a stretch of clear sky overhead and the moon in full glow, it was the perfect night for capturing some long exposure shots. I doused the fire and then headed into the forest where the moon was not as bright. The cold bit at my skin, and I noticed that the woods around me were alarmingly silent. There was nothing out of the ordinary in particular, but it all still felt really weird. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, an absolute earth-shattering roar echoed through the trees, shaking me to my bones. I instantly knew that I wasn't alone anymore. It was primal, heavy, more of a savage growl that held a promise of ferocious strength. I shook off the unease and told myself that irrational fear had no place in my rational mind, right? But glaring hints started crowding the back of my mind. Things like the undergrowth rustling with no particular wind, the strange whiff of sulfur in the otherwise crisp night air. I tightened my grip on my camera because, believe it or not, the lure of the perfect shot urged me to explore further. Every snap of a twig underfoot seemed amplified. Every shadow seemed to sway subtly, making me jumpy. Picking my way deeper, the silence was shattered again by another growl, this time close, way too close. No woodland creature could create a sound like this thing did. I set my camera to capture whatever was making that thunderous sound and took careful steps toward the direction of the growls. Before I could make heads or tails of what was happening, a rustle in the undergrowth ahead stopped me from taking another step. There was a fiery glow reflecting off my lens, and that's where this story takes an interesting turn. There, in my viewfinder, stood a creature that took my breath away. In the dim moonlight, it looked like a dog, but much larger. We're talking about the size of a full-grown grizzly bear, but hunched forward, muscular and lean. That thing was probably 6 or 7 feet at the shoulder easily. My eyes were drawn to its fur, dark and matted, almost like it was covered in ash. And then, its eyes, they were glowing like live embers in the dark, an intense, sinister gaze that held my terrified yet bewitched attention. Its growl made the air vibrate, and in its resounding echo, I could hear whispers of anger. The primal part of my brain screamed danger, my heart trying to pound its way out of my chest. The most shocking part when I think back on it was the smell, a stench that seemed to pervade the entire forest, a dreadfully strong scent of sulfur that clung to the back of my throat. I knew instinctively that this was no creature of the natural world. I may not be a believer in the supernatural, but the creature before me was nothing less than demonic, a monstrous dog right out of the fiery depths of hell. I did what anyone in their right mind would do. I ran, tearing through the forest. I was guided only by the moonlight. Maybe it was my imagination, or the adrenaline, or the sheer terror, but I swear, the whole forest felt like it was closing in on me. Every rustling leaf, every snapping twig seemed to echo the creature's growls, and I was finding everything in the moment to be disorienting. When I finally reached my camp, I discovered my campsite was in utter chaos. My tent was torn, my gear was strewn about, and the previously inviting campfire ring was in complete disarray, replaced by an ever-lingering stench of sulfur. It didn't take a genius to put together what had happened. I packed my stuff, abandoning my ripped tent, and bolted from the area. I didn't stop driving until the sun came up and I was miles away from the forest. Once the initial shock wore off, I stopped and collected myself. I got out of there alive, but I was forever changed. When I hike or camp now, the serene forest paths flanked by giant trees now turn into eerie trails that could be hiding anything. The sky, once full of beauty, is now just a dark canvas to hide the secrets of the wilderness. The exciting mystery the woods can now be a lurking threat. I do not look at the forest with the same innocence anymore. It's haunting yet thrilling, alluring yet daunting. The only thing I know for sure is that the wilderness has a way of revealing what we're really made of. I came out scarred but stronger, and with one hell of a story. This story still gives me chills thinking about it. This happened just last summer when I was out in Joshua Tree National Park, doing something I love, night photography. Have you ever been there? The clear, dark skies? For me, there's something sacred about it. My day job is draining, so photography, it's a release for me, a way to create something beautiful and tangible in this increasingly virtual world. One evening I joined this guided night hike. I figured it would be a good idea. They know the lay of the land better, and I just had to focus on my camera settings. Plus, I might pick up a few pointers from other photographers in the group. But as we walked, I got this itch to strike out on my own, away from the chatter. So while we were stopped for a rest at one point, I told the group lead I was going to break away to find a unique vantage point. The leader reminded me to stay within a line of sight, which I confirmed I knew. Then I moved away from the group and started to set up my gear. Now shooting night photography, it's a whole different ballgame. I was swapping my lens, adjusting the tripod, fiddling with the settings, ISO, exposure. But in the stillness of the night, it isn't just about capturing a shot. It's a spiritual experience. At least for me it is, and I started to click away. Honestly, it was humbling. Shooting long exposure shots does that to you. While the camera is doing its thing, you're left staring into the sky with your thoughts. There's a silence that cloaks the desert at night, and a solitude that swallows you whole. Even the short distance from the group seemed to multiply under that star-filled sky. It's quiet enough to make you feel totally alone. You would think stuff this beautiful can't be eerie, but it can be. But the serenity, that's what draws you in, and you soon start reflecting on life. But as I was out there waiting on my exposure, something really weird started happening. You know that tingle you get when you think you're being watched? Or that sensation when you feel an uncanny presence near you? It was a slow, creeping feeling. Just as I was about to pack up my gear, I saw this light in the sky. It wasn't a star or an airplane. It was brighter and closer, rotating lights that flickered between various hues and a sheen that seemed metallic. It hovered in the sky like a drone, but way larger, and without that constant buzzing noise you hear from drones. I know this because I own a drone myself, and this wasn't that. Now my first thought was, this is some military technology, but I quickly dismissed it. Near Joshua Tree? Unlikely. Besides, the movement was too erratic, too inconsequential. It made 90-degree turns, accelerated and decelerated in ways no known aerodynamics would allow. There was this thrill of fear because, man, it was clearly not something you normally see. It was mesmerizing. I found myself just watching, forgetting completely about my camera by my side. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to unglue myself from just watching it and decided to try to get a shot. Now, capturing a digital imprint of such a thing, it felt like a big deal, sort of like making something imagined slightly more real. So I aimed my Canon at it, adjusted the lens, and took multiple shots, though trembling hands didn't exactly make the process easier. Then, after what felt like a lifetime, it vanished. Not in the conventional sense, not zooming off into the distance. It just pixelated, bit by bit, like static on an old television set. The desert swallowed its light, and it was gone. I stood there, speechless, for a long time just looking up at the sky. I remember my mind trying and failing to rationalize what I had just witnessed. To my relief, or perhaps disappointment, I didn't see it again that night. I stumbled back to our group, my mind lost in a loop of the encounter. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, and the desert was never quite the same after that. When I reviewed the shots, I did manage to capture the strange object, a faint silhouette, light bleached against the darkness of the sky, an odd shape, indistinct but irrefutable. After showing the images to a few friends and in online forums, there was talk about UFO phenomenon. That's when I figured I had to share it with you. I've wondered, debated, and finally concluded that there are things out there that defy scientific explanation, and that's okay. You can share this with your audience or not. Either way, I hope it makes someone out there feel a little less alone in their experiences, because I sure as hell felt lonely after that encounter. Looking up at a clear night sky is different now. It isn't serene, it's eerie and exciting, an uncharted mystery right above us. What's out there that we don't know yet? Or maybe, what's out there that we aren't meant to know? Anyway, I hope you find this interesting. Find this. I bet you wouldn't expect to hear this kind of story from a documentary filmmaker, but trust me, this one will have you on your toes. A few winters ago, around late November, our small filming crew landed in Skagway, Alaska. Talk about crisp air. You've got to try Alaskan winters. Man, you'd think your nostrils would freeze with each inhale. But beyond that, this place, it's a beauty with the rugged mountains surrounding the town and the rustic charm of the structures. Its history is incredible, with the stories of the gold rush, of ambition, bravery, and devastation, all crying out through that winter silence. We were there for a shoot on a historical documentary about the Klondike Gold Rush. And boy, oh boy, was I looking forward to the trip. We began our work soon after we landed, interviews with local historians, exploring heritage locations, museums, that kind of stuff. You get the picture. It was all pretty routine, a bit cold, but routine, until the day an old-timer named Pete, whom we were interviewing, mentioned something he called a mine demon. Now, applying logic to the any paranormal stories can essentially steal away their charm, so I decided to entertain Pete and let him talk. He spoke about how back in the day there was this abandoned mine where miners frequently witnessed unexplainable things. Flames with no sources, horrendous shrieking sounds from the depths, phantom figures, you name it. Now he was pretty old and full of these outlandish tales, but he swore on it, said it was real. Word around town was divided. Some laughed it off, while some others whispered about their own weird encounters near that mine. At this point, I got interested, not just as a paranormal enthusiast, but as a true documentary filmmaker. After all, capturing the folklore and tales of a place gave a much more rounded representation of its history. So, with my curiosity piqued, and with a few willing crew members, we decided to check it out. The sun was setting as we reached the location, an old decrepit entrance, half caved in, surrounded by an eerie quietness. It had that air of a place untouched for years, the type where you were intruding on historical dust. Snow lay untouched around it, a stark contrast of white to the dark entrance. The atmosphere was unsettling, and frankly, quite chilling, not because of the cold, but something else, something denser, more elusive. As the last streaks of daylight disappeared, a sudden gust of wind swirled around us. It stung our eyes, carrying with it a smell so vile, so unnerving. It was like burnt meat, sulfur maybe, a smell I can't quite put my finger on, but my gut screamed that it wasn't natural. We had our equipment, lights, cameras, and we ventured forth, taking in the claustrophobic darkness with our senses on high alert that we might see or encounter something. The stillness was deafening, a silence that only abandoned places have. Something was off, but we pressed on as our excitement pushed us deeper into the mine. As we moved further in, the air grew denser, the smell stronger. It smelled like the worst kind of fear, putrid yet freezing. And that's when we heard this strange sound, a low growl, or was it a laugh? It echoed off the cavernous walls, a sound that seemed to be layered with an array of whispers, laughs, screams, sobs, and threats. It was chilling, to say the least. Sure, it sounds like cliché horror movie stuff, but it wasn't, because in that moment, something shifted. The semi-peaceful eeriness of being in a place with history suddenly morphed into this tightening dread that surrounded us. Our lights began to flicker, and we heard what sounded like whispers. It wasn't clear, almost like someone was speaking in multiple tones layered together, creating this cacophony of sounds that echoed off the walls. And then we saw it. Well, not it exactly. We saw a shadow, a huge one. It was standing, or rather looming in the distance. Part of my mind couldn't believe what was happening, simply because accepting it as real was, well, I didn't want to go there. But the growing chill in the air and that horrendous smell was making it really hard to believe otherwise. My mind kept flipping between terror and curiosity, and let me tell you that curiosity and terror make a really bad mix. I tried to hang on to my sanity, tried to convince myself, my crew, that this has got to be some prank. But the grins were tense, and everyone's eyes were void of humor, just pure terror. The shadow was crouching now, its form a grotesque silhouette in the glow of our lights. We couldn't see clearly, but from what we made out, it had horns, and its stare was glowing, fiery. It felt like it was seeping right into our minds. That's when I think I lost it. I remember turning and scrambling towards the entrance. We all did the same. I remember the echoing, roaring laughter, that stench of horror, that all-encompassing feeling of pure evil billowing behind me. We barely made it out, still hearing that laughter ringing in our ears, feeling that gaze burning at our backs. We left everything in there, the equipment, the cameras, even our courage, and maybe a part of ourselves. And just like that, the adventure was over. To this day, I can't forget that smell, that laugh, that fear. It was something demonic, something I cannot and will not quantify into facts or critique into a well-documented account of supernatural. I feel like we crossed something that was best left alone. I went back home with an experience that is both a blessing and a curse. It exposed a hidden, fearful facet to a world I have always been in love with. It's a story I can share with disbelieving laughter over campfires, but also the one which still keeps me awake some nights. I would like to think that the mine demon was not real, but I know better. To me, it remains a terrifying reminder of how small we are in the bigger picture. Remember that the scariest demons can often be the ones that lurk in our minds, the ones we carry around all our lives. And sometimes you confront them in the weirdest places, like an old, decayed mine in Skagway, Alaska. All visits don't end with souvenirs. Some leave you with nightmares. So there I was, right smack in the middle of a semester abroad in Hawaii, studying, surfing, and spending as much time in the water as I could manage. As for the surfing, let me be honest, it was new to me, but quickly becoming addictive. I was hooked. Maybe it was the beautiful freedom of the island routine rubbing off on me, but one morning I decided to watch the sunrise from the middle of the surf. I told myself, what's better than having an isolated beach all to yourself, with no one but a rising sun for the company? But isn't it the thrill we all crave? The beach was a slice of paradise nestled on the north shore of the island, known for its monstrous waves, and also, as I'd come to discover, for its lack of people at the crack of dawn. It was the ideal spot for an amateur surfer like me, wanting to test my skills against the Hawaiian waves. I remember I woke up while it was still dark, grabbed my surfboard, and set off on a trek downhill towards the beach. It wasn't a popular spot, but with a steaming cup of strong coffee warming me up from the inside, I shrugged off any doubts. As I finally stumbled upon the beach, it was exactly as I had pictured. Untouched in the faint morning light, with the moon above, the crash of waves was music to my ears, and the scent of the sea was intoxicating. The anticipation of what was to come had my heart pounding. I wasted no time in shedding my clothes and waded into the water with just my surf shorts and my board. The water was a bit colder than I'd expected, but I began paddling out, pushing off the sandy seafloor until it was too deep, and I had to float on the board. Even in the early morning light, I could make out the looming sets out in the deep water. The bigger waves always came in sets. It was like watching a slumbering giant gently stir in its sleep, unveiling its power. I waited, keeping my eyes on the horizon, watching as the sun slowly started to rise. The first wave of the morning set rolled in, and I paddled hard to position myself, my muscles straining with my efforts. The wave rose beneath me, carrying me along, and for a fleeting moment, I found myself flying on the water. It was magical, and a rush that went straight to my head. I stayed out on the water, eagerly embracing set after set, thrilling in the sheer power of the ocean. As the sun continued to rise and the morning came to life, I was caught up in the rhythmic dance of the surf, losing track of the hours. Then I felt it, a subtle undercurrent, a shift. The waves were behaving oddly. They had an irregular tempo that didn't correspond with the natural swell. There were ripples spreading out from a point far away from where I was bobbing in the water. Instinctive caution started to creep in at the back of my mind, and I found myself squinting into the distance, eyes scanning the water's surface for what? I'm not sure what I expected to see, but it sure as hell wasn't what I got. There was a shadow beneath the waves, huge, unfathomable. The water broiled and heaved around it as it moved towards me. The sunlight made the water too glaring to make out the shape clearly. My breath hitched, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. I was petrified. I had no reference for this entity surging under the ocean surface. Strange sounds drifted up from below, low-frequency murmurs that sent vibrations through my body. I found myself distancing from my board, my actions sluggish in the weight of my fear. I blinked, trying to comprehend the enormous sight. And then I watched as it moved past me, moving closer to the shore. Towering swells lifted my board and me like a toy, the ocean displaying the monster's immense size to me. Its passage caused the waves to form into a gigantic surf, one that had me hanging on to my board for dear life. When I finally paddled to shore, I was trembling. The sunrise had never looked so encouraging, and the sand under my bare feet was so very welcomed versus the open water. My body was weak from my close call with the creature, and my nerves were singed. My heart continued to thud against my ribcage. Looking back at it, I was the intruder, and now, as much as I tried, I couldn't distance the memory of the encounter from my mind. It was there when I woke up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night, and whenever I stared into the horizon, forever expecting another monstrous shadow to cross my path. I had hoped to find solitude and peace in the Hawaiian surf that morning, yet I found terror and a confrontation with my own mortality. But along with the fear and caution, I gained a new respect for the ocean's scream, its unfathomable depths, and the cryptic creatures that reside in it. The question that plagues me now, however, is whether to forget or to face the memories of the experience head-on. Would others understand? Would they believe? Or would they dismiss it as just another tall tale from a young and inexperienced student? So this happened a few years back when I was hiking my way along California in the late summer. One of those journeys of self-discovery you find yourself doing at certain points in your life. I was carrying nothing but the essentials strapped to my back. I wanted to experience simplicity and solitude after a year of devastating losses, having had both of my parents pass within months of each other. I had been on the road for a couple of weeks by then, walking basically from dawn till dusk, occasionally hitching rides, and then setting up camp under the open sky. The day of the encounter started as any other. I woke up and broke down my camp, rolling up my sleeping bag and stuffing it into my pack, and chowing down on some trail mix and a cup of coffee I made in my slick portable coffee maker I got the previous Christmas. I trekked across hilly terrains, forests, and the like. They say that when you are alone, you are more conducive to the energies around you, both seen and unseen. This particular day, though, there was an undercurrent of strangeness. As the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows, I found myself next to a lake, a perfect spot to pitch my tent for the night. The far edge of the lake was lined with thick pine woods that gradually inclined to become hills at some distance. The air smelled sweet and earthy, promising a peaceful night's sleep. With that thought, I set about preparing a makeshift meal over a small fire I had started. But here's when things took a turn. As the evening got dark, an odd sense of unease started settling over me. There was this strange smell wafting intermittently, a rank, stale odor sort of reminding me of that one time I got lost in the back alley behind Jimmy's seafood shack. Yep, that seafood dumpster was disgusting. It wasn't overpowering at first, but it was definitely noticeable against the otherwise fresh air around. Just as I was trying to shrug off the smell, in came the first of the sounds. Deep, faint, but distinct. It seemed like a cross between a whoop and a long howl, reverberating through the quiet air. It was weird and distant, but unmistakably close enough to keep me on high alert. The combination of the two sounds was unsettling, to say the least. I knew it could be any animal, of course, but something about the peculiarity of the sounds and the unsettling smell kept my stomach twisted in knots. I had this industrial flashlight with me, and I thought it'd be smart to take a look around. As I swung the beam of light around me, trying to peek into the shadowy confines of the dense trees, I saw nothing other than the picturesque view of the moon reflected off the lake. Little did I know then how drastically things were about to change. The sane thing would have been to pack up and move, I guess, but my stupid bravado kicked in. I tried to put those strange signs out of my mind and continued with my little camp ritual. But the whole situation started escalating, quickly. The smell grew stronger, and the sounds started seeming less animal and more human? Weird, huh? There were now these heavy, rhythmic grunts followed by a kind of knocking sound. a deliberate series of woody thunks like someone was smacking a heavy branch against a tree trunk. I think it was then that my gut instinct started screaming for me to get going. It was at that moment when I saw it. I swear on my life, I saw this colossal silhouette that almost gave me a heart attack. It was inky black against the night sky, partly hidden amongst the dense tree line on the other side of the small lake. Now I know what shadow boxing means. But this wasn't just about my mind playing tricks. I knew I was not alone. This creature was huge. I'm talking the Hulk, kind of massive. By the looks of it, it could easily have been taller than two people combined. It had this rugged, brawny outline, the beefy, shapeless mass shifting as it moved. I shone my flashlight at it. The light beam hit its eyes, which reflected a bright and intense red. I can never forget those facial features, not if I live to be 100. A prominent forehead, heavy jaw, wide nostrils, flat nose, and those deep-set eyes. Its hair, or was it fur, I don't know, but it was a mix of brown and reddish, covering most of its visible body. In sheer terror and excitement, I found torn between wanting to flee and the crazy desire to see more. But honestly, I felt trapped and vulnerable, like a classic deer in the headlights. But I didn't have the chance to decide. The creature let out a bone-rattling scream that echoed across the hills, and then it turned and walked away from my vision. It was gone, just like that. I then just stood there listening to the diminishing rustles of the underbrush until the entire area returned to its peaceful silence. The following day was spent in a daze, packing up my stuff and trekking onwards. That encounter with the Sasquatch, as I named the thing, proved to me the stark reality of things that we often dismiss as folklore. Needless to say, my little journey of self-discovery transpired into something unexpected and downright mind-blowing. Made me wonder, though, how many others have their stories of strange encounters, stories that they keep buried down due to fear of mockery. Maybe it's time for more conversations like these.